Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and our topic today is about embracing emotional intelligence. My guest today, Dr. Greg Stewart, is a licensed professional counselor, an executive coach, and a consultant based in Rockwell, Texas. He's not too far from me. And with a PhD in counselor education and supervision, he brings over 25 years of diverse experience to his practice. He is also the author of I3, and by that I think he means I3 squared, unlocking the inner strength behind your negative emotions. And I should know it because I've read the book, but I'll get him to explain the name. And he specializes in intelligent emotional intelligence, leadership development, and personal growth. And I do have that book in front of me as we speak. It's pretty fascinating. Greg, good morning. Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio, and thank you for sending the book. Oh, and before we get started, can you tell our audience a bit about you, how you like to show up in the world, and what is that book title all about?
All right. Well, thank you, Denise, so much for always the opportunity to come on. It's absolutely my pleasure. So it's actually the title is actually I cubed. There's the 2 and 3s. Like I was a math major in college way back in the day, so I love math. So it became the I cubed, and that simply is a technique. 3 I's: information, interpretation, intensity, and it's a process in the system by every time it's kind of on the spot, need critical thinking skills in order to put our emotions at bay and think through how we should respond to each individual situation. So I liken the I cubed process unto like the Panama Canal, where the first lock has to fill up before the second lock opens, obviously. So the first lock is information. And the rule is that it is illegal for me to have any opinion, interpretation, or any emotion, intensity, until I have as much information as I can get. And imagine if our society and our culture applied just that one technique. It's illegal for me to have any opinion or any emotion until I have all the information. So once that first lock is filled up, then we get to the interpretation. Interpretation is where we have more of the critical thinking of, we have to use this obviously is when we experience information and experience a situation where we have negative emotions. And the first thing is that we have a negative interpretation. So there's a negative interpretation, a neutral interpretation, and a positive interpretation. So the key rule there is, or question is there any other way for me to look at this, to interpret this? And that is an emotional intelligence skill where we look objective reality at the situation instead of just subjectively. And we pull ourselves back and say, look, there are many truthful and valid and wise interpretations of the information. So it is our responsibility to pull out all those, right? So it doesn't mean that our negative interpretation is wrong. It's just there are logical, objective ways of looking at it. That's just kind of a matter of fact way. It's not positive or negative. It's just neutral. And then there are actually positive ways where we can turn it around and look at it differently. So it's all those interpretations can be laid out and they all have to coexist together because they're all interpretations of the information. And then finally on the intensity, I frame emotion as energy. And that's just the process of being able to, what amount of emotional energy do I need to respond effectively to this? And that then plays out into the deeper part of the book is most of us as humans that we experience a trigger or a situation and it should be like on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 1 or 2 level of importance, but we had these inflated emotions and we're at like a 6, 7, or 8. And it's really that inflation where we have to double click on that. And that's where the subtitle of the book, Unlock the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions, where we have to stop and not dump all that negative emotional energy on the person we're upset with or the situation. We've got to stop and figure out and do a deeper dive into that process. So the IQ process, and then it really exposes the inflation of emotions where you have to do a deeper dive.
I have had to learn because, when I was younger, I had a hair trigger temper. Every now and then it'll pop back up and I'll say, Denise, take a seat. You need to have a chat with yourself. And I've had to learn that everything you're just talking about, I can access pretty quickly. I don't have to say, well, let me think about that. Sometimes I do. Sometimes it's mandatory that I just step away and say, let me think about that. I'll get back with you. But most of the time, because I have trained myself unwittingly, I didn't know it was a thing. I just knew that my hair trigger temper was going to get me in trouble at some point. And it just, I was a mean kid. I really was. I hate to admit it, but I was. And I started training myself to take a breath, look at things objectively when I can. And I try to do that most of the time. And if I catch myself getting really, as we say in the South, all head up, I walk away from it. So I guess my question to you is, can this be trained? I trained myself, so I guess it can be
Right.
trained, but what can people do who are saying, oh man, I'm watching the news right now, it's killing me? Well,
Right.
here's my attitude, quit watching the news.
Yeah.
But there's a simple answer for you. Wait for it to work itself out and then find out later what happened. But there, I guess, and I can almost hear people say, well, yeah, that's a lot to undertake. How do I learn to do it so it's part of who I am and how I react?
Yeah, and that's very valid, and that's why when I tell clients I'm a very I call it active counselor because my goal is to equip, and there are a million different techniques that we can use in these variety of ways, and it's kind of funny. I'm sure your listeners thought too that it's interesting that you would have a hair trigger because you've definitely transformed that because your voice is so soothing that it wouldn't nobody would ever expect probably you to have a hair trigger, but so the book does two things. It equips and techniques, but also I want to give an understanding of what's actually happening. And through that understanding, it'll help us know exactly how to respond to it. So, for instance, I begin the book simply saying, so the first thing is like just whenever you have negative emotions, that's the red flag. That's the sign that we need to evaluate. But to realize that everything we do in life, I mean, literally everything is trying to achieve an emotional goal. Now, what that means is there are micro emotional goals, which is, I'm thirsty, so I want to feel, I don't want to feel thirsty, so I drink some water to have to feel my thirst is quenched. I'm hungry and I want to feel full or not feel hungry. Or that, somebody's upset with me and there's that it's hanging there, so I don't want to feel that. I want to feel peace. So the micro emotional goals are day in and day out, right here and right now. But while we're doing these, we're also in pursuit of our macro emotional goals, which is increasing our quality of life. And that kind of goes into three categories that we're always in pursuit day in and day out of increasing our number one, standard of living, logically. Number two is the macro goals of living our values. This is how I want to live my life. And number three is the big one is in pursuit of fulfilling destiny, purpose, and calling. Okay. So we're always in pursuit of those emotional goals. We have negative emotions when we feel something or someone is blocking that emotional goal, right? So we have to address the blockage of that emotional goal. So the first step is to recognize the emotional goal. Secondly, is to realize that the emotional goals are always good, but we have to assess the paths we take to achieve the emotional goals. So, like, say, for instance, the easiest one is if you are trying to reduce stress. And I did this like years ago when I was at a very stressful job. I would make the mistake of doing it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and I would have some alcoholic drinks after work every day. Of course, I don't do that anymore, but that's a very I go with rational, healthy, wise, and right. We got to choose a rational, healthy, wise, and right path to achieve the emotional goal. So first there's an assessment of here's the emotional goal, and then we got to choose the right path. Now, when those emotional goals are blocked, so I say what we do is kind of picture this metaphor. So we're standing there, and behind us is the house of our heart. Okay. And we're standing on the front lawn. And what we all do as humans is we're looking ahead and looking at all the people and things that are triggering us and upsetting us and making us angry, which a lot of things we don't have control over those things. So it's a control versus no control. So again, there might be something to address. Let's say you do something that hurts my feelings. Again, I might need to tell you about it, but on a scale of 1 to 10, the importance of it again is 1 and 2. But again, I'm at a 6, 7, or 8. That again, that inflation is what we have to do with. So that's where I say we have to pause. Because if we just keep standing and looking at the thing that's triggering us, um, that means that the solution to my negative emotions is in the environment. And that is death. That's where we all make the mistake, but it's so natural because we're burning this energy like they hurt my feelings or they've got to change. I was saying, no, this is what you have to do first. Turn around and walk into your negative emotions, walk into the inflation, into the house of your heart. And in the house, I have different rooms. Like there's the first one is insecurity, which that exposes a lot of what we need to address. So there's insecurity, anxiety, fear,
We all
worry,
have,
anger, and
yeah,
depression.
we all have it. I mean, imposter syndrome, it's everywhere. I have it. We all have it. And if you're saying, no, Denise, I don't have it. Yeah, you do. Okay, keep going, Greg.
Yeah, that's right. So so with those, we have like there's techniques I give around, how to respond to anxiety, insecurity, all that sort of thing. But there's 3 reasons for the inflation. One is we believe a lie about the situation. Let's say, again, you hurt my feelings. I believe a lie about you because I believe the lie that you meant to. And I believe a lie that, that I can't, that we're never going to get through this or whatever. Or let's say I'm without a job. I believe the lie, like my frontal lobe will say, I'm never getting a job. Well, when your frontal lobe says, I'm never going to get a job, your mental model just obeys and produces a lot of negative emotions. So, first, it's like emotions don't produce themselves, they come from sentences in our mind. And those sentences are the interpretation going back to IQ. The second reason for the inflation is this, and this is where we get kind of deeper into our hearts. So, that first floor is insecurity, right? So, insecurity basically is something I don't like about myself, but somebody comes along and exposes it. And I get defensive and I try and hide it. Well, that's an insecurity. So, off to the side is the doorway that leads to the basement. And in the basement is the machine of identity, value, and worth. So when we take things personally and our emotion is inflated, something doesn't work out for us again, and somebody, criticizes us, it's impacting our value and worth, and it should not impact. So there's a whole process I walk people through to solidify your own value and worth. So in the basement is the machine of identity, value, and worth. So that has to be addressed. But over in the corner of the basement is the dark, dingy cellar door. And that's the cellar door of trauma or very negative experiences. So big T, little t trauma. Big T is the diagnosable stuff that a lot of us, thankfully don't experience. But all of us have experienced little t trauma, which are those negative experiences. So just as a 3-point outline, how do we actually address that inflation, that agitation, irritation? We've got to turn around and walk into what's being exposed to me. So I say all negative emotions are being exposed in me. And I won't let myself off the hook until I figure out am I believing lie? Am I allowing this situation to impact my value and worth? Or is my brain saying, oh my gosh, Greg, this reminds me of a negative past event where I had a really bad experience, and it's like a backhoe scooping emotion from that event and plopping it on the center. So there's a whole process as far as techniques with each one of those 3, but that's the big kind of picture 3-point outline of how we can master the decrease of these negative emotions.
Yes, and when I say hair trigger, I very rarely experience that anymore. But I used to, and it never turned out well. And I finally figured that out. I said, okay, Denise, you've got to stop. You've got to find another way to live. And I did. But what I do now is when something's, just kind of lands, like you say, that big old scoop and it lands on my desk, I'll look at it. And I think in pictures. I'm a web developer. I think in pictures. And I'll see literally a big old scoop of, I don't know, cow poop on my desk in my head.
Right,
And
right.
I'll sit back and I'll look at it, or I'll stand up and walk to the other side of the room and I'll look at it. And then I'll say to myself, Denise, is this really real? Is this true? And that starts a whole new dialogue. And I'm able to take that scoop and get it off of my darn desk.
Yeah. And that's a perfect example where, so it's number one, it's in the hair trigger. is simply that tells us it's a impulse response from our mental model, which all that means is, we are who we are today based upon our, DNA, life experiences and choices. And all those experiences and choices and stuff come into that our mental model, and it's doing its job. I mean, it's basically having to, in lightning fast motion, give us a response to the situation. So our mental model is doing its job. But when we have that hair trigger, realize that we're not stuck there because our mental model is giving a hair trigger response as it should. So we have to pause. And like you just said, that's number one, is just to realize that we retrain the mental model with different formulas of response. So that's the hair trigger. And then secondly, it's like you just said, you have to pause and say, outside of the first step is, what am I believing or interpreting about this information, this pile of cow poop on my desk? That's perfect. What am I believing about the situation that is not true? So that's dealing with the surface emotions of immediate emotions don't produce themselves. They're coming from sentences of interpretation in my mind. And I need to make sure that all those sentences of interpretation are true or rational, healthy, wise, and right. That's always going to be the first step.
People are listening to us, and I know they are because this is a very popular podcast. If you can't take the moment, find a moment. Hang on to it, whatever that was, because you want to go back and reassess it. I'll tell you what I do, Greg, when I've got something that just bugs the heck out of me. Normally it's code. I'm a web developer. It's a piece of code that I can't work out. I will literally walk into my kitchen. I've got a big double door French door refrigerator, and I open up those doors and I stick my head, my neck, my torso as far as I can get into that refrigerator. And I call it my open refrigerator door meditation. I just wipe my mind clean, literally.
Mm.
The only reason I come back out is when the door starts dinging because it's telling
All
me
right.
you're
All
helping
right.
to shut the doors. But by then, I've had a moment. I've given myself that moment to say, okay, now let's take a look. Is this
Right.
real? Is it really real? Is this true? Can it wait until later? I do a quick assessment. But I had to train myself to do that. I really did.
And that is so at the first blush is like it's called, the EI, emotional intelligence skill of impulse control. And there, we do have to master that we just stop because again, emotion is energy. There's good emotional
Right.
energy and then there's negative. So that energy flow is coming. We want it to come out, but we have to exercise impulse control because again, we train our mental models to recognize when red flag, I have to evaluate before I just execute. So we do. We have those coping skills to step away. So I do that a lot with married couples. I call it stop and schedule. Like my second book, IQ for Couples, is coming out and actually next week. So what we have to do is stop because we don't want to cause damage because a lot of the times these negative emotions are coming from a loved one or a spouse. So we stop, and that's the impulse control. And then the schedule simply means that we schedule a time to discuss it further. But in the in between time, between now when we stop and when we're scheduled to come back with cooler heads and discuss it, in the in between time is this entire process I'm talking about where we have to figure out what's being exposed in us. And by the time that happens, then we can come back to our spouse or loved one or whoever it is, and then present a cogent, rational, healthy argument at the right amount of emotional intensity.
I'm picturing somebody like me who will say, okay, we're going to come back to this, be here at 7:10 p.m. And I've got a list. I've spent all that time just going, "Nip, nip, 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 nip." So I had to train myself out of that too. Shut up and listen, I think is the best thing I can advise. Active listening, it's your friend. Don't take a list when you're when you're going to try to find some equality in whatever it is that, your business partner, your wife, your husband, your cat, whoever you're arguing with. Don't try. I have a 20-pound cat. I argue with him all the time. He wins. His
I would
name
say
is,
the cats always win. Yeah.
he's hashtag Hamilton is an ass, and he
Right.
is. So, but most of the time he wins because he's so cute. But, here's the thing. If you're going to be arguing in your head all the time, I'm going to go back to what you just said. Just stop. Give
Mm,
it a rest. Sit down,
mm.
shut up, and listen to yourself, and then figure out what's going on.
Well, in the process, so think about the process, the psychological process of active listening. That is basically realizing that, I talk about in like chapter 2, I think, where there is this foundational heart assumption of humility and teachability that, you know what, at any given moment, I don't have all the information. I'm missing information, or, and both, and that my formulas for interpreting the situation are skewed. And a long time ago, I just landed at Greg, your mental model is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So there has to be a walking into of teachability and humility, meaning the active listening process means that you are genuinely seeking out insight, wisdom, and understanding because you don't have all the information and your formulas for interpreting are not perfect. And that's why I say, for instance, if any math people out there, like if your formula has an x squared, but it should be an x cubed, your product's going to be wrong. So active listening helps you pull out not only the information, but also a way to interpret it, which will go back to I cubed. Is there any other way of looking at this? So you cannot have any emotion until you have all the information and that you pull out all the different ways that of interpreting it. And some of those ways of interpretation aren't in your brain already. So you have to find other resources to pull those interpretations where it's like, and we've all experienced this, like we get more information. Like somebody said, I was mad at somebody because I thought they said something. They came to me and said, no, it was this, 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 and this is why I said it, interpretation. And then we went, oh, we've all experienced that. And that from those experiences should teach us to practice impulse control. And then if I have really high negative emotions, when I know it's not that big of a deal, I pause and go inside and figure out what's going on. And am I believing lies? Am I not interpreting this correctly? So I have to engage the situation in my heart and say, what am I missing here? Because I can't keep burning energy on focusing on the external parties that I am triggered by, because my insecurities are not their issue to solve. They're mine. The inflation I'm experiencing of negative emotional energy is not my wife to solve. It's my issue. And it's that ownership. And we have to go through the process of figuring out not only information interpretation, but is there something deeper here? Am I like the value and worth? Like I use the phrase of with people, it's like, look, the issue isn't what they think of you. The issue is what you think of you. And you're needing pursuit and validation from other people to fill the vacuum that you can't fill yourself in the way you view yourself. That's a you issue thing, right? So one gal, when I was working with her, a teenager, she said, Dr. Greg, she's pushing my buttons. And I said, well, honey, uninstall your buttons. So the issue isn't that she's pushing your buttons. The issue is you have buttons to push, and those buttons are insecurities. And when we take things personally, so it's really facing what we have to face and taking ownership. And it sounds bad, like in a sense that, deal with your issues, but no, it's taking power back from the environment. And it's like, I don't have insecurities today, and I'm stronger now than I've ever been. And it's the power and the control no longer rests in the environment. The environment can influence me, which it should influence me, but it doesn't have power and control because I took the power back and being able to have mastery over my own emotions. And that's where people find rest and peace. And that's the goal I have for everybody. It's just so much more comfortable and so much more peaceful. And I have so much more confidence. But it is a process, but it's such a powerful healing process.
Now, we're talking about active listening, and I firmly believe in active listening. I do a lot of it 3 times a week on this podcast. But, and I don't think this is the proper way to phrase this, so you can correct me or counsel me, and I'm giving you permission. But I use active listening in my own head. I'm listening to me. I'm listening to, and I call them God winks, especially if I'm in the shower. I've gotten, you're going to think I'm a lunatic, but I take bathtub crayons into the shower with me because I take my showers hot enough to steam cabbage. I'm relaxed. Nothing's bothering me. Nobody can get at me. The phone isn't going to ring. I can listen to God winks. And
Mm.
I'll get these, and when they start coming, they come fast, and I'm scribbling them down because like, oh, and I'll hear myself say, okay, Denise, I'm going to do this. No, that's ego. We can do this. That's a God wink. And half the time it's brilliant. And I write them down. But I've learned that the most negative voice in my head is me.
Yeah.
and I'll tackle them in the shower. Say, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa. Uh, and I say this a lot on the radio too. If anybody, because we all have negative self talk, some of it's very old, some of it's incredibly stupid and wrong, but we stick to them. But if anybody in a Walmart parking lot spoke to me the way I speak to myself every now and then, Greg, I would need bail money. Seriously. So,
Yep.
I don't know if that's active listening or what you would call it, but I pay a lot of attention to what I'm thinking and saying to
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. I mean, I love your approach. So, always the psychobabble approach to it, meaning, so what you're doing, I hope your listeners pick up on this, that you're brilliant in your approach, because what you're doing is, by putting, half your torso in the refrigerator or doing that hot shower, you're using a technique to calm yourself. Why? Because in your brain, when you are angry, energy is being pulled from the frontal lobe into the amygdala, the emotional center of our brain. It is, again, it's biologically created, it's there, but when it's not used appropriately, we have to find a way to calm ourselves, and our mental model needs to understand, look, we don't need to go and, fight, flight, or freeze. So you use those beautiful techniques to soothe yourself, to get the energy back into your frontal lobe. And your frontal lobe is where the God whispers happen, and where you can actually analyze and be objective. And that's the key, objective about yourself, and start hearing from objective points of view, external sources, like just even your own mind. Of, you say, okay, Greg. So when you say, okay, Greg, or okay, Denise, you are talking to yourself objectively. That's the act of listening, because you need
Right.
other objective points of view, instead of, when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you're only listening to subjective, emotional, relational survival. And then it's completely subjective, which is skewed. So you need those soothing techniques to get the energy back up in the frontal lobe. And then that's where you can actually process, journal. And that's where all that brilliance starts coming at you, where you have to write it down really quick, because you are now going into problem solving and looking at it objectively and critically thinking. And that's what emotional intelligence is. It's the ability to manage your emotions and use your emotional energy in an effective way when you need it, and then being able to exercise impulse control when your emotions are blocking the goal of a true, objective, rational, healthy, wise, and right solution.
And let's talk about subconscious because I dig in there a lot, because there's a lot that my innards know. I don't even know how to pronounce, how to explain this, but when I don't sleep a whole lot, I never have, never needed to. Maybe one day I'll sleep for 4 hours in a row and go, ooh, that's what it
Wow.
feels like, but I don't. But when I know I'm just about to actually fall asleep, I get all excited and I'll look up at my ceiling fan and I'm praying, I'm saying my prayers out loud because who knows who's listening? The universe, God, who knows? And I will then address my subconscious. Something bothered me. I did something stupid. Somebody did something stupid to me. I wasn't able to get past to it, or I need an answer to a coding question. Or, I'm writing a book right now. What's my next chapter about? And I will ask my subconscious to take it under review. And Greg, I'm telling you, 3:18 in the morning, without fail. I
Mm.
wake up, the answer's there. I write it down. I may get up and make a gumbo. I may go back to sleep. I don't know. But I write it down because my subconscious delivered because I asked it to.
You know, that process, and it's fascinating to me. So I read this quote where, somebody said that spiritual development is bringing the unconscious and subconscious to the conscious, because in our conscious and subconscious, honestly, are, because the most insightful, wise things that we've ever come up with ourselves came from the application of a principle or truth that is sitting in our frontal lobe. And then when we pause and we allow our minds to resonate, we take that principle or truth and we run it through our own system in the unconscious and subconscious. And then from that, we own it and becomes a part of us. And that's where the insight happens. That's when the insight of the application, like, oh, I get it. And then we're able to explain
Right. Write
not
it down,
just
though.
the
Write it
principle.
down because you will forget it.
Yeah,
Write it down.
exactly. And it's a beautiful process by which we're able to, apply it. And what are we doing? We're taking the truth of the principle and we're inserting it into our formulas. I call it mental model formula formation. Like I give, like, say, for instance, I tell people just try and apply nothing bothers me unless it should. So it's not about having zero negative emotion, like on a scale of 1 to 10. It's not about having zero. The goal is to start out at nothing bothers me, and then you can kind of work your way up to the right amount of emotional energy instead of doing what a lot of us do, like what you mentioned earlier, is the hair trigger. I'm boom, instantly at a 8 or 9, and I need to somehow work my way down, which is the coping skills, work my way back down to what it should be, versus you just stick that in your mind of your impulse response is nothing bothers me unless it should. So the unless it should comes in
Say
where I'm
that
not,
again. Say that
yeah.
again because that was
So,
important.
yeah,
Nothing bothers me.
nothing bothers me unless it should.
Perfect.
So I start out at 0 or 1, that then I say, okay, through the should, it means that I should address something. It doesn't mean avoidance. It doesn't mean passivity. I should address something, but I'm starting out at 0. I'm already in the frontal lobe. And then I do all the I cubed analysis and different things and work my way up to the right response, the right emotional energy. So that's a mental model formulation, like in that you, like, say, wake up and write something down, and realizing that, I've got to apply this to my own self. And so your mental model is totally teachable and says, it will do whatever your frontal lobe says. So when you keep repeating, nothing bothers me unless it should. Or when it comes to identity, value, and worth, I'm actually doing some videos on that today for social media. It's a matter of keep saying to yourself, look, I don't need that person, whoever it is, I don't need them to pursue me, validate me, or approve. I want them to, but I don't need them to. It doesn't change the expectations of the situation, the definition of relationship. What it changes is the degree of negative impact on me if that pursuit doesn't happen. So it goes from need to want. I don't need them to pursue or validate. I want them to, but I don't need them to. Another mental model formula formation that we in our minds just keep saturating it and getting it into our unconscious and subconscious, so it becomes a natural mental model response, that impulse response. So, like, I impulses are not bad. We do have good impulses because there's a lot of effective things we do. Like, I don't need to push the snooze button. I just impulsively get up. I impulsively do workouts. So it's about good impulses and bad. So when you stick that truths into your mental model, you now impulsively start, there's your hair trigger, but in a good way, an effective way, an emotionally intelligent way.
Right,
You
right,
hair
right.
trigger and say, okay, nothing bothers me unless it should. Now it's a part of me.
There
That's
you go.
maturity.
Right. And when you're talking about, I want this person to like or care about me, but how important is it? I heard, in fact, it was my friend Larry Winget. He was one of my very early podcast hosts. This thing is 17 years old, so it was a long time ago. But I remember him telling me, I think in our first conversation, that his attitude was and still is, and I grabbed it because I didn't know that there was a phrase for it. But he said to me, "What you think of me is none of my business." And I went, there it is.
Yes.
There it is, because it really isn't. I mean, you either like me or you don't. Most of you are going to like me, but you don't have to. But here's the thing, it's really not my concern unless or until you do something directly to me, then we're going to have a chat. But, you know, our brains are busy, busy, busy. What you thought you heard or what you thought can change in an hour. I'll read a book, I'll read a paragraph in a book, and what I thought I knew about that is like, huh, well, that I didn't see that before. So if people you think they don't like you, don't worry about it. Chances are they
Yeah.
do. It's just how you perceive them. I don't
Yeah.
worry about it. I really don't.
Yeah. Well, in the process, like with other people, it's, it should not impact our value and worth. But we all kind of go back to, there's, like, attachment styles. There's anxious attachment style where we're too worried about what people think. And then there are the dismissive attachment styles where we need to worry more about what people think simply in this, that because of our mental models, we have a lot of messed up formulas. And the key thing that has driven me crazy my whole life is, if you're familiar with the Johari window model, it's, known to self, known to others. And there's real quick, known to both of us is the known area, known to me, not known to you is the closed area, not known to either is the hidden, but the area that has driven me crazy my whole life is the blind area. It is the truth that other people see things about me that I don't see about myself. So it is this balance of realizing that my value and worth is not contingent upon other people's approval, but they may have some insights for me that I need to hear. So it's that balance of, I have a blind area and my goal is to eradicate it. So I use this technique when I coach executives called proactive teachability, meaning I'm going to go to my followers and say, hey, where am I blind? How can I grow? I like teasing people and saying, hey, are you a good listener? Yeah, I think I am. Well, have you ever asked people that you're talking to if they feel heard by you? So how do you know whether or not you're a good
Yeah.
listener unless, right? So are you a
Right.
good parent, right? Yeah, I think I'm a good parent. Have you ever asked your children, hey, how am I doing as a mom and dad? Are you a good spouse? So whatever it is, we evaluate ourselves, but we really kind of need to proactively go to those key people like our followers. Hey, am I a good leader? And get that insight. Because again, that blind area is, we got to figure out a way to eradicate it. So when we get feedback that's truthful, which is related to insecurity, that we don't get triggered by it, we simply own it. And if it's not true, then we don't have to. But no matter what, it does not impact our value and worth. And once we do enough work, both in that eradication of the blind area, as well as the solidification of our identity, value, and worth, we do so much work there that we know our strengths and weaknesses and we have a strategy to improve them. That's part of the work of identity, value, and worth. Then we're much more free to go to people and say, hey, I know I don't see everything about myself. Give me some insight. And so we're asking for that feedback, getting that insight, and then that's good information that we need. It's good objective information we need, but we don't take it personally, and we don't let it impact our value and worth. And that's the combination of this tension, a very, very good tension that needs to exist. But both principles are true.
Saying all that, I started clutching my stomach, and then I realized I was clutching my stomach. So I have some work to do. And I'll give you an example, and this popped in while you were talking. Years ago, a friend of mine, she's my best friend, and we needed to go to Atlanta, Georgia, which is a 10-hour drive anyway you cut it. And once you get onto Peachtree, you're going to be there for another 18 hours. It's just god awful. It really is. And we were talking, and I tend in my mind to be abrupt. I tend to, speak what's on my mind. I don't have much, and I've told most people this. I may be a highly committed introvert, and I am, but I'm not shy. And I don't have much in the way of filters, so I consider myself to be woefully blunt. And she asked me just out of the blue, she said, Denise, don't you think you're a compassionate person? And my head swiveled around. I said, have you met me? And that started a whole new conversation. She dressed me down,
Mm,
and she was right and I was wrong. I was not identifying that I have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion. I just thought I was kind of a witch.
all right. All right. It in that, so without getting too deep into it, it's like when you have that response of bluntness, it's not related to, in a sense, the empathy. It's just in that situation. That's where EI is, that there are situations. Every situation is different, and it's called situational awareness or social intelligence. That sometimes, honestly, your bluntness is the most emotionally intelligent response. But when it comes to it's not all or nothing. So I love explaining like the word, empathy, sympathy, and compassion. So it comes from, I took Greek, that the word pathos in the Greek is suffering. So pathos and pathos is suffer with. Well, passion, like if you may remember the old movie, The Passion of the Christ, back in 2004, I asked people, what does passion mean? And they, of course, apply our American definition of it, which means deep emotion. I'm saying, no, passion actually is an old term for suffering. So compassion is to suffer with. And then when you say, do you get people, like empathy is a cognitive understanding, meaning I get where you're coming from and why you're experiencing what you're experiencing and I get it. I really get you. Sympathy is more of the emotional, like, man, I'm feeling what you're feeling. And same thing with compassion is kind of a combination of both of I'm suffering with you. And then, of course, probably a lot of people that know you, like your friends, like Denise, you absolutely do that. I mean, the whole context of your podcast and how you relate to guests and what you're passionate about is that you want to suffer with people and get people and understand people that be on a cognitive and an experiential level. But when the situation arises where, you're just not going to tolerate certain things, then that side of you comes out and you're just like, I'm not discussing this. End of discussion. We don't need to process it. Boom. And then again, depending upon the situation, that might be the perfect response. So that's what it is. It's about a situational awareness where, can Greg be Greg? Or does Greg need to kind of exercise some other aspects of me that are still training and development, more empathy and compassion with people? So it's a both and depending upon the situation.
Okay, I just let go of my stomach. I feel better now. I looked down, I went, what the heck? Yes, because, when you feel something or you hear something, it hits you in your body and you have
Yes.
to pay attention. I mean, I'll start getting a headache and I'll think, why am I getting, oh, I'm thirsty. Obviously, I'm thirsty. So off to the refrigerator I go and I fill up my water bottle, but it could be something else. It could be something niggling at the back of my head that just hasn't made its way out yet. So I pay attention. Am I thirsty or is something bothering me?
Yeah, it's good. Very much
Mm,
so.
yeah, but anyway, I let go of my stomach. So you did good. So, okay, so I wanted to ask you, and I am on page 125, the chapters That Which Threatens Me. And it starts anxiety versus stress. And I think that's a big topic because stress is different to me from anxiety. So let's talk about that. Let's go a bit deep into that if we can.
For sure. All right. So when I do like introduce the surface emotions, insecurity through depressions, I say, okay, so number one, emotion is energy, but number two, I say, which I haven't mentioned yet, we have to have the right brand or type of emotion, which means that we have to label it correctly because like anxiety is a big one. Clients come into my, quote unquote office, via Zoom saying they have anxiety. So when they start explaining it, it's really the same kind of feeling, but it's not anxiety. So anxiety is trying to control something we can't control, right? So that's the no control column versus the control column is stress. Well, stress is that it feels the same as anxiety a lot of times, but it is energy produced in the things that we have to control. So if we have control over it, then we burn that energy executing. But what do some people face? They face the issue of procrastination and when they do that, things start building up. So when things start building up of the list of things they got to do, now they start to feel like it's overwhelming, it's too much, which gives them the semblance that they can't control it. That's where the feelings of anxiety come in. So we have to differentiate, so with anxiety, I like to ask, okay, what's the threat? Because a lot of times people have anxiety and it's not valid because they just have anxiety because they train their mental model. So I say number one is if it's anxiety, that means it's something you don't have control over, but that means that there's an external threat. So define it. Now, sometimes I will say that people do need medication because I call it an overstimulated amygdala, which we won't go down that road, but first define the threat. And if it's truly a threat, because a lot of times people can't, they just have this anxiety, but a lot of times it's really in the control column. So I said, don't you realize that when you say I have anxiety, again, your mental model doesn't debate you. It just responds. And the way it responds is in that amygdala, fight, flight, or freeze. But if the emotion you're feeling is really having to do with the list of things you need to do, then you need to get on it and burn that energy executing what you need to execute and do what you need to do because that's your mental model is doing its job. It's telling you, hey, here's some energy on these tasks that need accomplished. Get going. But our frontal lobe says, well, gosh, I don't know. And man, I don't feel like it. Like I feel like out of control. And your or your frontal lobe should be the master, but it's the one screwing everything up by saying, by believing lies. And your mental model saying, okay, but the energy is going to sit there because these tasks still need to be done. But then it could be a mixture where you have a threat of something that may or may not occur. And that's where I get into fear versus worry. And so you have to define the threat. If it's truly something that you can't control, then there's a different response to that. But a lot of times it's, what label of emotion am I going to give this? Is it stress or anxiety?
You can't, I mean, seriously, you can't go on the internet and find some, oh, I've got anxiety, I'm being treated. And you're telling this, and I'm going to go back to the subconscious because it listens to us. It knows what we're talking about, in my opinion. And if I constantly say, oh, I've got anxiety, it believes me.
Yes.
So I try not to give my subconscious a bunch of crap. I really do. It's like, I don't want that in there. Let's just stop right now.
Yeah. One thing like on the subconscious where, like I try and with some people liken it onto a computer. So our conscious is what's on the computer screen, right? And our subconscious are those programs running in the background. And then our unconscious is the hard drive. So the subconscious, the programs running in the background, that's where I say, like, okay, our micro goal is right here, right now. But then our macro goals are those programs running the background. And we're always, here's where we're always assessing, right? We're always assessing our pursuit of and our success in achieving those macro goals. So this is where I say there's a mood. So a mood is basically our recent history of successes or failures in achieving both micro and macro emotional goals. So if people they develop anxiety because there has been a lot of either failures or things have happened outside of them they don't have control over that makes them have less hope or less of a feeling of success in accomplishing those macro goals. And that mood is, it's either sadness, worthlessness, or whatever, or it could be anxiety because they feel like they're not in recent history have been successful in achieving those macro goals. So the mood plus the overarching evaluation of achieving our macro goals of quality of life, that's what I think is in the subconscious. And in the unconscious, the hard drive are all those formulas by which we interpret everything. So we had, like you said, listen to that subconscious because that's what we have to tap into. This is where it's coming from. What is our subconscious telling us about our conscious and our current on the surface emotional state? And there's a lot of wisdom there, a lot of insight there.
Depend on it and my instincts. You can call it instincts. You can call
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
delving into your subconscious, whatever it is. I trust my instincts for the most part. I
Yes.
wanted to ask you, environmental triggers. I think we've touched on that just a tad, but how can we distinguish between legitimate issues that we need to address with others and situations where our emotional response is often wildly disproportionate?
Yeah. So a couple ways. So environmental things. Okay. So number one, if it's environmental, that means it's in the no control column, right? So then it's okay. So what's the threat in the no control column environment? And then the threat then turns into what the future holds, which is based in fear and worry. So fear is something coming in my direction that I don't want to have happen. That's the threat. But the key word is probability. The probability of occurring is high enough that I need to burn energy trying to keep it from happening or minimize the consequences if it does. So that strategy is in my control column because 90% of the control column is, of course, there's the things we have to do, but a lot of the control column is in response to the no control column. So the threat turns into fear and worry, and we develop a strategy to try and influence or keep that threat from happening. Now, worry, and this I think you were getting to, is we catastrophize things like we listen to the news and we need to turn it off. It's worry is the exact same thing. We don't want something to happen, but the probability of it occurring is so low that it's actually a lie. But emotionally, we're calling it as if it's true. And we can't develop a strategy to keep it from happening because it's so catastrophic. So that's what produces this anxiety when it's the probability of occurring is so low that it's actually a lie. So in those environmental triggers, sure, what is our response? So what's my strategy of response? So define the threat. Then is it fear or worry based upon probability? If it's a fear, sure, develop your strategy, respond, influence, right? But if it's a worry, the probability is so low, then you need to call it like that is a lie. I'm believing something or worry that I just have like a 9/11 thing I have no control over. So you dismiss it. You have to because it's not in your perusal of your mental model or anything to burn energy trying to impact something you have zero control over.
Taught me, and I really do not. I don't watch TV. I never did enjoy it. I'm not a movie. Now you give me a stack of books, I'm all happy. But just sitting in front of any kind of moving screen is just not where I want to live. I don't enjoy it. But when 9/11 happened, I was actually driving downtown to go pay a bill, my water bill, I think. And I heard it on the radio and I didn't pay my bill. I whipped that car around and I went home for 2 solid days. And I'm not proud of this. For 2 solid days, I sat on my window seat with my cat. He passed at 18 years old. His name was Sawyer, you little bastard Griffiths. I have a thing about mean orange cats. That was his vet
You and your
record.
cat, right?
I'm telling you. And God bless him, he was glued to me. He was up under my chin, on my chest for 2 solid days. I wiped tears on him. He didn't, and he was a big cat. He didn't object, but my now ex-husband came in the second day and he looked at me and he looked at the TV. He said, Denise? I said, yeah. And I was still, and I'm not a crier. I was shocked by how semi-hysterical I was. And he said, have you learned anything new today? And I said, no. He said, is this all the same regurgitated news? I said, yes. He said, turn it off. And I did. And not too long after that, I cut cable because I realized that I was feeding into something that I couldn't do a darn thing about. Couldn't predict it, couldn't do anything. Yes, I could donate. Yes, I could send up prayers. There were things I could do, but I couldn't live my life walking around going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It was hurting me badly.
Very
So
much so.
I learned some lessons there. And now, we had this plane crash, helicopter crash last
Yeah,
night.
yeah.
I'm not watching it. I'm going to wait for it to shake out and find out if there's any actual true news. But right now, I can't I can't absorb it. It's not up to me to do that.
Yeah, and obviously based upon if you're religious, not religious, there's a each of us have to do the God thing as far as who does we believe control everything. But the key is that what we have to watch for, because I mean reality is reality. I mean there are bad things out there that we may or may not need to burn energy thinking about. But the key is that we have to watch out for how much it's impacting our day to day. But it's all in catastrophizing.
Right,
Like
right,
this has, like you said at the beginning, this has to play out, right? And the world is not falling. I mean, if the world was falling apart today, and we're in, well, then, then it's over anyway. It doesn't matter, right? So we have to recognize again those sentences going in our mind of beliefs and interpretations and opinions. And we're going to find a lot of untruths or exaggerations in there that's producing a lot of this negative emotional energy. And that's where we have to deal with. And that's why turning off the TV, because you have no control over it. It has to play out. And you have to be able to get back to what you do have control over and respond accordingly. Because we only have so many emotional resources and we can't burn them all on things that are full of lies because there's no fixing a lie. But so many of us don't recognize in that unconscious and subconscious how many lies
right,
we are believing.
right. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And again, that's another reason, call it whatever you want, legacy news, mainstream media, whatever you want. I consider it propaganda. I go find my own ways of finding information. I don't listen to any of them. But I've been that way all my life. When I tell you I don't put up with a whole lot of nonsense, I don't. And I'm not taking their nonsense, and I try not to take too much of my own nonsense. And there's plenty of that to be dealt with. I wanted to go back just a little bit because we were talking about our environment. How do you recommend that people who are navigating situations where their environment consistently triggers negative emotional responses, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are living like that. What can you tell them?
Well, the with the environmental triggers, like again, most of them are going to be in what we have control, right? There are people in our life, right? So when there's a negative, there's an environmental trigger. Again, the defining of it, that a lot of these environmental triggers we have to respond to. Okay, that's fair. But again, it's the first step is to, turn around and figure out what's happening, what's being exposed to me. So, like I said, the three tenets: emotion is energy. Number two is to have the right brand or type and the right amount of emotional energy. But number three is all negative emotions exposing something in me. So when that's the first step, when you have environmental triggers, the chances are very high that we're going to be inflated, right? Because that's just who we are as people. So the first step is the recognition of the negative emotions, and then number two is to do an about face first. And may not take a long time, right? It just, you have to do an about face, walk in the house, figure out what's being exposed, and then the process of what emotional goal of mine is being blocked, and so on, and all the techniques and the negative emotions. So I would say that's number one. It's when you have the red flag of negative emotions from an environmental trigger, stop and turn around and figure out what's being exposed in you to take that power back. And then after you go through the process, whatever it is, the emotions, insecurity through depression or identity van worth or what have you, then because even like the deeper ones like identity vain worth and trauma, we can set that aside. We recognize that, man, I got to deal with this. We can still set it aside and then come up with a strategy of response to the environmental trigger and then address that. So it doesn't mean everything gets solved right then. It's a matter of recognizing what it is and then setting it aside if we need to, because we'll deal with it later. But coming up with the emotionally intelligent response to that environmental trigger, because that's still we like a one or two level of energy to burn on response, an effective response. We don't avoid it and we don't blow it away, because that's what we do when we have all this extra negative emotional energy. We dump it on that, and that's just not fair to the person. So giving them the right amount, and then in the back of our minds we say, okay, I need to figure out a way to deal with this deeper stuff. So separating it and then being able to respond to the environmental triggers, but then coming back if we need to deal with the deeper stuff.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned you're writing a second book and it should be published pretty soon. It's about married couples. Can I get you to come back when it's ready?
Yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, it's kind of like ready now. It's coming out this coming Tuesday. But
Oh,
yeah, I'd love
okay.
to. Yeah, I'd love to.
Congratulations. Well,
Thank
what I'll
you.
do is I'll give you a call, and I'm thinking specifically about people, married couples who maybe work together, they own businesses together. The stress there can
Mm,
be just off the charts. But, marriage, I think, is very, very difficult. I've been married. I'm not doing it again. I did my time. Done. Yeah, and I mean it too. But, relationships are tricky unless you kind of navigate through them. So definitely, I'll give you a call in a bit and we'll get you set up. Now, I have to tell you, we're booked right now through April. So
mm,
it'll be April or May before I can get you back on, but I definitely want you to send me that book and get you back on. Before, Greg, thank you so much for being with here today, and I really appreciate it and the book. Before I let you go, do you have any final thoughts or advice, and where can our audience connect with you?
yeah. So thank you, Denise, for again for the gracious opportunity to be on. Final thoughts would be is these negative emotions. I just want to reframe it that they're not bad. They're there for a reason. And the whole point of walking in them is to give yourself more confidence, more rest, more peace, because truly at the end, on the other side of these negative emotions, I'll talk about my own personal journey in the book. I am stronger now than I have ever been. And I am more confident, more at peace. So I just want the same thing for you, is to unlock the inner strength behind your negative emotions. So you can just simply find me at drgregstewart.com. That's where you can, find my books, give you links to Amazon, but the Stewart is EW, not you. So it's just DR, Dr. Greg, all one word, Stewart.com.
And I'm going to tell our audience several things here. Dr. Greg Stewart's groundbreaking work in I Squared offers more than it's not just a book. It provides a roadmap to understanding our deepest emotional landscapes. And listen, you're going to have to do some work. And here's the big word: by recognizing. That's the big word that we've been talking about today. that negative emotions are not our enemies, but powerful messengers, and we can transform our internal struggles into opportunities for profound personal growth. And to continue this transformative journey, I encourage you to take three key actions. First, purchase I3, I cubed information, interpretation, intensity, unlock the inner strength behind your negative emotions, and start exploring what we have been terming your emotional intelligence. And don't simply read the book, actively engage with its principles by keeping a journal. Those help you track your emotional triggers and practice the strategies that he outlines. And then finally, expand your learning by following Dr. Stewart on social media and by visiting his website becomingmore.com for additional resources, or even considering a telehealth counseling session to dive deeper into understanding your emotional landscape. And listen, remember, your emotions are not your weakness unless you're like me and had a hair triggered temper that you wouldn't do anything about until you went, hang on a second. They're your greatest source of insight and in strength. It's time to unlock your inner potential and embrace a more authentic, emotionally intelligent version of yourself. Greg, thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate the time that you spent with me and the book, and I look forward to reading your next book.
Thank you, Denise. Again, my honor, my pleasure.
Oh, it was my pleasure as well. I'll talk with you again.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.